Hello everybody, and welcome to Significant Events for Inuit in Canada, a very brief history. My name is Heidi Langille and I am a cultural educator for Adventure Canada, in my opinion the very best travel company, especially traveling to the Arctic. And I am looking forward to giving you this brief presentation and any questions that you may have. A little bit of history about me. I am an urban Inuk. My dad is Inuit from Labrador. My mom is Dutch from the Netherlands. And I have spent my adult life working in the South, what we call the South, in Ottawa, Ontario, advocating for Inuit and working to improve the lives of Inuit as best I can. I'm going to go into a brief worldview differences between Inuit and non-Inuit, because our worldview feeds into our history and how we look at history and our perspective on history and that kind of thing. So Inuit worldview, beginnings suggest an ending, and for Inuit there is no ending, therefore there is no beginning. The way my dad always explained it to me was, it's from where we are now to infinity behind us and to infinity in front of us. And because there is no ending, there is no beginning, so we do have some creation stories, but the world has always been. And then as new things come into being and how that came into being. So we do have creation stories. Oftentimes you hear people say since time immemorial with no end. That's just the worldview of infinity behind us to infinity in front of us. And because for Inuit life comes from life and returns to life, therefore every life is worthy of respect, from animals to people to nature. Everything comes from life and everything returns to life, and because we are just one part of that whole process, you'll find that the characteristic of being humble is revered in the Inuit communities. Similar to life coming from life, breath comes from Sila. Sila is the big everything and returns to Sila. It is never truly gone, and that's why we respect everything that has happened before us, to everything that's going to happen in front of us, because it's all part of the whole process of who we are and how we came to be and all the rest of it. So history for Inuit includes everything that came before us, and because it's an oral tradition, we don't have very many things written down until very recently, but the stories have been passed down from generation to generation and shared with future generations. So in Canada, there's evidence of Inuit as early as 2500 BC. So Inuit have been around for a very long time in what we call Canada now. In 1576, Martin Frobisher explored Baffin Island, and it's interesting to note that Martin Frobisher didn't use the word Eskimo or Inuit. He actually used the word country people. That's because Eskimo wasn't known yet, it wasn't in lexicon yet, and Inuit for the people. Inuit simply means the people, and that's what Inuit call themselves, but it hasn't been put to wide use in Canada until the past 45-50 years. In 1585, John Davis, you might know his name from the Davis Strait, he came and explored the Arctic areas in the north. In 1602, Henry Hudson also came to do some exploring. You might recognize Hudson's name from Hudson Bay and the Hudson Bay Company. In 1616, Robert Bylot and William Baffin also did some exploring. Baffin is what Baffin Island is named after. And in 1650, commercial whale hunting really begins, really takes off. And the commercial whale hunting worked with the Inuit for the whale hunting, and the whales were brought back to Europe. there's wonderful stories of encounters between whale hunters and Inuit that have been passed on. And it's interesting because when you hear it from the perspective of Inuit and then you read about it in the history books, the different perspectives that were shared. In 1750, the Moravian missionaries begin to explore Labrador. The Moravian missionaries came from the German area of Europe, and they soon settled in Labrador and started to create change on the Labrador coast as early as 1750. In 1845, Franklin had his expedition. Lots has been written about the Franklin expedition. So much has been written about the Franklin expedition. Songs have been sung about the Franklin expedition. And this is where news of Inuit reached Europe on a more consistent basis because it was tied into Franklin's lost ship and people looking for Franklin's lost ship. This beautiful picture here taken by Dennis Minty shows three of the graves, I know there's 4 graves, but 3 of the graves of Franklin's men who passed away on Beechey Island. The 4th was somebody who passed away when they came looking for Franklin and his men later on. So in 1860, the very beginnings of syllabics were begun. Syllabics is the written language of Inuit now. But like I said, we were an oral tradition before that, and largely oral between 1860s and 1970s. It was still a largely oral tradition. So in 1860s, the very beginnings of syllabics started. It was missionaries who created the syllabic writing system for the Northern Cree people, which were later adapted for Inuktitut. In 1867, the Dominion of Canada became a dominion, like I just said, and that changed, of course, what happened to the Inuit in the Arctic. And in 1869, the Hudson Bay Company transferred its lands to the Dominion of Canada, which grew Canada almost to what you know it as today. So between 1871 and 1912, there's a beautiful book called In the Shadow of the Pole, an early history of Arctic expeditions, and it's written by Susan Osborne, who is a fantastic person who also travels with Adventure Canada. So to find out more about those Arctic expeditions, I really do recommend reading In the Shadow of the Pole. She can give you so much better history than I can in this brief presentation. Between 1921 and 1924, the Danish explorer Rasmussen had his 5th Thule expedition, and much has been documented from that Thule expedition, and so much information came out of that, so that is worth looking up if you're interested in early history as well. In 1922, a documentary, the very first documentary, was created by a man named Robert Flaherty, and he called it Inuk of the North. Inuk of the North is taken place in northern Quebec, and Robert Flaherty's granddaughter, Martha Flaherty, also travels with Adventure Canada. So when you travel with Adventure Canada, you are in excellent hands of people who know and understand the North. The next few slides I'm going to go through are decisions by others in the last 100 years that have negatively affected Inuit. So it's a really tough couple of slides that I go through, but it really helps understand what has happened to Inuit and how it has affected them. And really, it was 100% decisions by others. So we'll go over things like the court and the criminal justice system, relocation, medical ships, residential schools, and so many other things in the next few slides. So we have the court and the criminal justice system and borders. Borders doesn't seem like, a thing to think about, but it really did affect Inuit. So for instance, in the image on the right, it's the Inuit circumpolar region, and it includes Greenland, Canada, United States, Russia. And Inuit traveled freely from one region to another to visit family, to go hunting, just to live, traveled freely from one place to the other. But then borders became a thing, and Inuit were suddenly told that they could not visit. They could not freely go from Canada to Greenland by dog sled or by boat or like they normally do. They had to have stuff like passports now, and that changed a lot of family dynamics. It changed a lot of hunting grounds. It changed several different things for Inuit. And for the court and the criminal justice system, Inuit had our own way of working with other Inuit who, I don't quite know how to say it, but who broke laws. Let's say that, who broke social customs for Inuit. There were wonderful processes in place to correct behavior, to ensure everybody's safety moving forward. And then we have the Canadian court and criminal justice system that stepped in. And Ken Harper, who has done many things, written many different things, done a lot of history and a lot of research. He writes a column for Nunatsiavut News, which covers a lot of these things. And out of those columns for Nunatsiavut News, he's come up with a few different series of books. And this one is called In Those Days, Arctic Crime and Punishment. So it's collected writings on Arctic history that specifically have to do with crime and punishment. And it's fascinating. Short little chapters, concise, and it's super fascinating to listen to or read, events and how the court and the criminal justice system did not work with Inuit. Basically, Inuit were there and they were affected and oftentimes arrested and not allowed to go back to their communities, and how devastating it was for many. I told you about Martha of the North, Martha, Robert Flaherty's granddaughter. She is part of a documentary called Martha of the North, and the documentary is about relocation. Inuit have endured forced relocation. Not all Inuit, it's very specific communities. The most famous or the most well-known one is the High Arctic relocation, which Martha's documentary covers quite beautifully. And it's the removal or the relocation of Inuit from northern Quebec all the way up to the High Arctic during the Cold War to prove that the Arctic belonged to Canada. The best way to prove that a land belongs to a certain country is to have boots on the ground, and Canada figured the best way to do that is to ensure that Canadians were living there, and so that they used the Inuit basically as human flagpoles to ensure that everybody knew that the Arctic belonged to Canada, or Arctic Canada belonged to Canada, I suppose. There were other relocations. There were forced relocations from northern Labrador to more southern communities in Labrador. My dad was part of the relocation of Hebron, and his family was sent to Nain. And some of his community members, they were sent to Hopedale, and some of his community members were sent to Nain. And it was, they were promised hunting grounds, they were promised housing. Same with the High Arctic relocation, promised housing, promised hunting grounds. And when they got there, it was not as promised and no way to go back. In the High Arctic relocations, it was promised that if it didn't work out within 2 years, then the Inuit can move back to northern Quebec to their families. But that was not followed through for many years afterwards. We have tuberculosis treatment. Years ago, tuberculosis is highly contagious, and one measure that was used to eradicate tuberculosis, or eradicate as much as possible, was to have sanatoriums. And these sanatoriums were located in southern Canada, and they were used for all Canadians, not just Inuit. However, the Inuit that were forced to go to the sanatoriums in southern Canada had no way of getting in touch with their family, letting their family know that they're okay or not okay, as the case may be. And if they happened to pass away or die in the sanatorium, their family was never told where they were buried, what happened to them. And if they survived the tuberculosis treatment, then they were released from the sanatorium, but oftentimes with no help to get back up north to their family. So tuberculosis is mostly eradicated in southern Canada, but you can see on the graphic on the right that it's still affecting Inuit over 300 times the rate of tuberculosis among non-Indigenous Canadian-born populations. So tuberculosis is still affecting Inuit. It is spread. We do have a housing crisis in the north, so there is overcrowding, which is part of it. And then a lot of the houses in the north suffer from mold and not proper ventilation and that kind of stuff. So tuberculosis spreads quite easily in the north. And that's why, one of the reasons why the north is working so hard to keep COVID-19 out, because it would have a devastating impact on the Inuit community. The next slide I have to tell you about is the medical ships and the E and W number tag system. So the medical ships to me is a brilliant idea. I absolutely love this idea. Instead of bringing Inuit from the north down south, away from their culture, away from their language, away from their families, away from the land, and away from everything, let's put doctors and nurses and dentists and lab technicians on a ship and bring the ship to the northern communities. Love this idea. It's absolutely a brilliant idea. However, the execution of this idea and what happened in Canada was not so brilliant. So what happened was, yes, the doctors and nurses and dentists and technicians all boarded the CD Howe, and the ship went to different communities in the north. Once it stopped in a community, everybody in that area was forced to go on board the ship. The first stop was to get an x-ray done of their lungs, and then they would go to the next station and the next station and the next station. And when they were done, all the stations on the ship, their x-rays were done being developed, and if it was shown that they had any treatable illness, they had to stay on board the ship. So if they had tuberculosis, or if they had an infection in their teeth, or anything else like that, they had to stay on board the ship. And then the ship would leave, and it would go to the next community, and then the next community. And it's heartbreaking to me to know that you were forced to stay on board the ship, and then once your communicable disease or infection was all cleared up, you were released from the ship. And my best friend's grandfather was picked up in northern Quebec for an abscess on his tooth, and he was dropped off in Pangnirtung, Nunavut. And it took him 7 years to get back, or to get word back to his family in northern Quebec that he was okay. This was before airplanes were traveling a lot, and before skidoos. And so it's a brilliant, brilliant idea, but the negative consequences are still felt today. We also have E and W number tag systems. Inuit call them dog tags. E is if you came from the eastern Quebec, eastern Arctic, and WK is if you were in the western Arctic. Inuit had a different naming system. We didn't have first name, last name. We had names that often changed depending on where you were in your life, and the skills that you have acquired in your life, and the relationships that you've acquired in your life. So your name could change several times in a lifetime, which you can imagine was difficult for bureaucracy to reconcile. So in a push to deliver services to Inuit, including family allowance check or residential school registration, or with the RCMP was in the court and criminal justice system, names seem to be important. And so what the government did is they created E and W numbers for Inuit on these little leather diskettes that Inuit call dog tags, and any interaction that you had with non-Inuit, nurse, RCMP, teacher, social worker, any interaction that you had to present your dog tag for identification. This program was slowly phased out in the 1970s with another program called Project Naming, which involved Inuit choosing what names they wanted to go by for government purposes. And so we have families that are all from the same family, but they have different last names because they got to choose which name they wanted to go by. And then spellings of names, it all depended on who filled out the forms, whether Kadluk was spelled K-A-D-L-U-K or Q-A-D-L-U-K or U-Q, or so many different spellings of people that are in the same family. Inuit were part of the residential school system. In Canada, you often hear this residential school system called the Indian residential school system. However, Inuit were part of it as well, so were the Métis for that matter. And Inuit were part of the residential school system and also the day school, the federal day school program. And there is enough information out in the world on the negative effects of residential school, thanks to work like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and their calls to action, and all of the resources that have been created to talk about the residential schools. There are Inuit specific resources. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is one called We Were So Far Away, and it talks about the Inuit experience in the residential school system. Another decision by others that negatively impacted Inuit was the sled dog slaughter. So before skidoos, before airplanes, the main mode of travel for Inuit was their dog sled team. And in a span of about 8 to 10 years, over 200,000 dogs were slaughtered by the RCMP. And I wasn't born at the time when our family dogs were slaughtered, but my oldest sister was, and she recalls the day that our dogs were slaughtered and how that affected her. She was on her way home from school and heard the gunshots and knew that something bad had happened. The RCMP have denied that there was a widespread policy to slaughter the sled dogs. And in response to that, the Kikitani Truth Commission did an analysis of the RCMP sled dog report. And this, you're able to find this online, and you can hear about how the sled dog slaughter affected Inuit. And I'll just read out this quote. The RCMP sled dog report from 2006. The RCMP sled dogs report exonerated RCMP members of criminal or administrative wrongdoing in the matter of killing Inuit sled dogs, and by extension exonerating the federal government. And yeah, I don't quite know how I feel about the RCMP investigating the RCMP, especially when it comes to something like the sled dog slaughter. But you can find this information online and you can decide for yourself. It has been, well, in the Inuit community, it's been well known that medical experiments have taken place. It's not that well known outside of Inuit communities. However, a few years ago, in 2019, the Inuit sued the federal government over medical experiments that included skin grafts. A lot of the medical experiments that happened to Inuit, at the time, Inuit didn't know what was going on. But looking back, they know that something wasn't right. I have known women who had involuntary sterilization done to them without their knowledge, without their consent, and without any sort of apology afterwards. They were able to have children. They went in for a procedure for something else completely different. They came out not being able to have children, and how devastating that was. There's also a documentary. I'm all about documentaries. There's a documentary called The Experimental Eskimos. This is probably the most famous case of medical experiments being done on Inuit. And this case is specifically on 3 boys. And this documentary delves deeper into that. But we do know that medical experiments were done on a widespread basis, not just these 3 boys. We also have the seal product ban. So moving from a semi-nomadic lifestyle, following the animals, to a wage-based economy, Inuit adapted and found that their seal products were one way that they could feed their families in the wage-based economy. And then the European Union did a ban on seal products. There is an exemption for indigenous harvested seal products, but the market for seal products bottomed out when that ban came into place. So there is a documentary. Always a documentary. There's a documentary about that called Angry Inuk. It's such a well done documentary by Alethea Arnonneck-Barrow. And then a few years ago, Ellen DeGeneres, before there was negative press about Ellen DeGeneres, put out a selfie during the Oscar night, and said that every time that this selfie was retweeted or tagged or whatever, a donation would be made to an organization that has harmed Inuit. And Ellen thought that she was helping animals, but it was harming Inuit, and Inuit tried to counteract that, and they tried to speak with Ellen DeGeneres and the organization that's known to harm Inuit, but they weren't getting anywhere, so Inuit started their own seal fee. So the Canadian Inuit post seal fees in protest over Ellen DeGeneres' Oscar night selfie, and this hashtag seal fee is still going on today. It's Inuit trying to raise awareness on the seal product ban, and I encourage you to buy sealskin products as much as you possibly can, especially from Inuit. When you buy a sealskin product from an Inuk, you are feeding that family, you are also feeding that community. So if you would like more information on that, please let me know. So that was a whole lot of negative stuff that's happened in the past 100 years, and yet Inuit have sat down and negotiated the largest land claim in the world, and we have done so many things to work together for the future. So the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement started in the 1970s. The hydroelectric dam was being built, and it was going to affect Inuit and Cree, who banded together for probably the first time in history. It was historic that the Inuit were working with the Cree, and took the Canadian government and the provincial government and the hydroelectric dam to court to stop the process. And out of that came the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, which is the very first modern day treaty that Canada signed. And it has had huge, fantastic influence on the Inuit in Northern Quebec and Inuit in the rest of Canada. So following the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, Inuvialuit in the Northwest Territories, they signed their agreement, and they signed their agreement with the Northwest Territories. And then the most well-known agreement is the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. It was signed in 1993 and came into effect in 1999 and changed the map of Canada for the first time since Newfoundland and Labrador joined Confederation. And there is a lot of information out there on all of these agreements. And if you need help looking them up, let me know and I will help you. So the last land claim agreement that we have in Canada at the moment is the Nunatsiavut land claim agreement, which is in Northern Labrador. And in all of those land claim agreements, you hear the term Nuna. So Inuvialuit, Nunavik, Nunavut, Nunatsiavut. Nuna means our land, and Inuit, we love friendly competition. Love friendly competition. So Nunavut, created in 1999, means our land. Nunatsiavut, created in 2005, means our beautiful land. Other ways that Inuit have been working together for the future includes radio and television. When the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation wanted to put stations in the north, in northern Quebec especially, they said, okay, you can set up your stations here as long as we have programming for Inuit by Inuit in Inuk. And that was hard fought and has had a fantastic impact on broadcasting in the north. We also have the Arctic Winter Games, and Arctic Winter Games are so much fun. Oh my goodness, so much fun. They happen every 2 years, and there's competitions like you would think for like hockey, volleyball, that kind of thing. But there's also competitions on traditional Inuit and Dene or other northern games, and so much fun. The hand games that happen, and the high kicks that happen, and the knuckle hops that happen, and all in the name of friendly competition. You'll see during those games the experts, the ones that are really good at their craft, helping out the ones that are just starting, and you'll see lots of laughter and lots of dancing, and absolutely worth looking up on YouTube, Arctic Winter Games. And then we also have many different court cases that Inuit are taking Canada all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and recently we have been winning. And the one that comes to mind is the Clyde River court case about the testing in the Arctic waters close to Clyde River, which would have negatively affected the mammals and the marine life around Clyde River. And Clyde River successfully took that case to the Supreme Court of Canada and won. And that concludes Inuit history in Canada, a brief history of Inuit in Canada. I hope you enjoyed. Always open to questions, always open to conversations, and always open to sharing other resources to further your learning. Nakamik, Madna, Kuyanamik, Tema.